I aim to ask questions with my work. I try to add faces from my community and faces that I come in contact with into my work. People that I know now, people from that I've met in the past, people that I see within the city. I live in Toronto. It's one of the most diverse cities in the world. So my work aims to document a lot of those faces that you may not see as often in pop contemporary culture. Media has often distorted representation of black and brown people, how we speak, love, live in day-to-day culture. I wanted to really take time to process how we got to this point because it's a chance to celebrate culture and diversity. I don't think it's intended for just black people. I think it's something that is a celebration of culture to educate ourselves, but also educate others, and an opportunity for others to learn about our culture and celebrate their cultures and their links in their cultures to our culture. For instance, if you go back far enough, cotton started in other countries before it was one of the main sources of income in America and the fuel for slavery. It started in other countries such as India, and they teamed up with people, the British and the French teamed up with people who had enslaved people and created crops in India. And then they used that formula that they created there, where it was a caste system where people with lighter skin were treated better and had better opportunities and more jobs and had a higher position in society. They were propped up if they were lighter skinned due to their basic resemblance of the British and the French and those from Europe. And then the people who were darker skinned weren't provided the same opportunities and weren't treated the same. And that system that they implemented there and that money that they made from those crops and the business got so large that they had to expand. And that's when they came to America, and that's when they brought slaves. Now, there's a deep history there. There's a lot of questions with it, but from my understanding, what I've learned more recently is if you look back to the Olmecs, black people were here. The Olmecs, if you look at the back of the Olmecs, which is a South American sculptures from thousands of years ago, they have cornrows. Cornrows like Kawhi Leonard. Cornrows like my girlfriend had under her weave. Cornrows like people in LA had, like Nipsey Hussle, they had cornrows. It was a black culture, and the features on the face resemble it, and if you see the back of the heads, it confirms it. And there's a lot of disputes, and there was a country that actually paid to have the back of the heads, not the images of the back of the heads, early in the 1900s, to not release those photos because it proved black people were here. I'm an artist, I'm an illustrator, I've worked in design, I've worked in illustration some time. I've spent a lot of time researching and learning. My more recent work focuses around black culture and other cultures in my community in my neighborhood, and how black culture and those cultures interact, and a lot of similarities a lot of those cultures have, as well as me going through and working out ideas and emotions and relationships with past girlfriends and concepts about where my culture came from and where our culture came from, how our society can improve. One of my pieces talks about, or is inspired by, how black males are viewed in modern society. At a very young age, they're adorable, they're loved. A good friend, a colleague of mine, I should say, Angela Baines, talks about that, about how young boys are adored and they're hugged and they're praised and they're looked at as these kind, beautiful children, but once they get older, they are feared. And that was an interesting point, and it's a valuable point. And it's true, and there's a lot of things that you can take from that. And my piece, Manna Musa, with Cleopatra, is asking questions about why is it that people are so quick to dismiss that Cleopatra could have had darker skin? Why is it that people do not know are not aware of Mansa Musa? Why is it that there's so many different mathematicians and designers and historic architecture that came from Africa? Why is that looked over? Why was it dismissed? And there's a deep history to that. I've enjoyed a lot of different things over time. I went to Sheridan College. At Sheridan, I learned a lot about leadership. I learned a lot about teamwork and grassroots. The grassroots effort to kind of get your name out, to kind of build a collective. And I got to work with a lot of different artists, for local clients, and after working with Puma and having sponsorships by Converse and Puma, I focused really on fine art. And that's when quite a few years later, 10 years later actually, I joined OCAD. And I'm a professor at OCAD, and I still work in my personal practice creating images and with fine art and painting murals and doing illustrations. Working with OCAD is a great opportunity because there's a lot of like-minded people there, and there's a lot of people with different, who aren't as like-minded, as in they don't have the same views, but we're like-minded in the sense that we want to add to society, we want to add to our culture, we want to benefit and grow, and we may not have the same views, but we're willing to talk it out, we're willing to discuss it. And for the students at OCAD, I think that's a benefit. Dory is an incredible person who talks a lot about inclusive design and the need for inclusive design and how you can implement those tools and how you can implement those ideas and concepts and why it's needed. She believes that design is not all about the end result. It's not all about the monetization of design. There's a responsibility to each of us and to designers to be responsible, to have a sense of responsibility. And that sense of responsibility, I think, creates better design. If you go back early to the story that I was discussing about black culture and about the history of it and the Olmec heads and how we're not aware of those things, it has us view ourselves a certain way as black people. It has other cultures, whether people are from India, whether people are from Sri Lanka, or whether people are from Malaysia, or whether people are from South America. They view us and themselves differently without knowing the full history. Like, how did we get to here? How is it that Black Lives Matter had to go into the streets and demand justice? Whether you agree with Black Lives Matter or not, you have to admit that what they did was quite impressive. They've changed quite a few laws in a very, very short period of time. And what they've done is they've created awareness not just on a national level, but on a world stage. And Black Lives Matter went from being a small grassroots movement to being this world concept and idea of hope and of change, to the point people in other countries are attaching themselves to this movement, where 5 years ago people didn't understand it and they did not want to be attached to it at all, because they understand the core. The core point is our society, why we're here is to make things better. And I think as designers and as illustrators, we have a responsibility to do that, and to take those ideas and concepts is of value, and it makes for better work. Many people are not aware that enslavement was not just in America, that Canada also had enslavement. We also look over the deep rooted effects that slavery and the laws that were passed and colonization in general had on Canada and how people in Canada interact. For instance, the Indigenous have been looked over for years, and they have very deep-rooted issues in which I sympathize with. And when I look at my own history and when I look at people I know, the Indigenous have had some things that can be looked at as similar. And so the laws that we're looking at and the work that we're doing, I think, in many ways is in line. So back in 1834, slavery in Canada was abolished. It was brought to Canada in the 1600s by the French. I keep referencing the Olmec heads and how cotton grew, and how, because cotton grew to such a large business, that the French and the British and the Dutch had to expand their enterprises in North Africa and in India and other parts, but then taking slaves from Africa and bringing them to the Americas. Now, they've done numbers, and it's 400,000 slaves were brought to America. Many of these slaves died due to treatment, and how many of the slaves died even traveling here. Now, when people who came here, the colonizers, arrived in Canada for the first time, if you look at some of the texts, they actually see that they took slaves. And now, in more recent history, things that were looked over and seen as not true because it didn't align with the story that the French and the British had told, is that blacks were already here. Blacks already had boats. Many of these boats wouldn't be, and so they did not survive. I mean, you can just ride the current. You don't need sails. Now, this is a study that I've heard. What I have looked into is the Olmec heads, and the fact that the Olmec heads are likely built by Nubian people. I also understand that people that arrived here, early texts and early documents from them said that they saw black people. Black people were here long before slave ships. We were living and sharing the land with the indigenous people, which is why I see so much value in culture and plants and crops and growing. It's something that's deep-rooted in black culture. It's deep-rooted in with the indigenous people, and the fact that we were living here. If you go back to the slaves that were brought here, 400,000, and the fact that many of them died, and slaves were shipped all over the world. They took slaves here, and they used those slaves and likely made alliances to help wipe out the indigenous people, which is terrible. The reality is that the story that is told to us is that we were brought here when in fact we were already here, and I think that's value because it gives us a position within discovery. It gives us a position within history where we've arrived here by ourselves. We had boats. We were more advanced than Europe at the time, and Europe used technology from Africa to expand. And there's people who obviously dispute that, but there's more and more information coming over time that aligns with those ideas and those concepts. Now, why is that valuable? Because, again, how we view each other and how we move through society, the laws that we pass, the things that we design for people, the things that we design for media are all affected by this history. And you have to have respect for who you're designing for. And to have respect for who you're designing for, you have to know their history. And we ourselves have to know our history and the value in our history. Now, to have slavery in the mass amounts to have slavery all over the world the way it was, what the French and what the British had to do was make people okay with slavery. The easiest way to do that is to make one group feel more entitled and feel on a pedestal and feel better than another group. And they get the better jobs and they get the better treatment, and the other group will not. If you make people think less of another group, they're less likely to feel sorry for them. They're less likely to show compassion. So the value in knowing that is there was a systematic plan to get to where we are today. And that systematic plan started long before any of us were here, and started with multiple countries, and over time we got here. And there's things that are still that still affect us. Look at advertisements where often people refer to them as the beautiful people advertisements, and what it is they leave out people of diverse groups. And I think that media and I think that advertisement should reflect the community that they're in, and even if they don't reflect that community specifically, they should look to reflect what Canada is a diverse country. What Canada is a beacon to many countries. Now, if we go back to culture and diversity and the history and speaking on Canada, and many people will say, well, if you're not happy with how the laws in Canada and how Canada works, leave. And I've heard this said to I've had it told to me to say to me to leave is it's ridiculous. Especially to me, if you look back in history, if you're French, Italian, you're an immigrant. If you're British, you're an immigrant. Any Canadian who's non-Indigenous is basically an immigrant, unless you're Indigenous or a Black Indigenous person from a bloodline of people who were already on this land. And there's very few people in Canada who are that. And the people who are that, I think there's value in knowing them, and I think they should be respected. But my point to that is, people say go back to where you came from to immigrants and new Canadians, but they're not taking into account why those people came here. And I think this is a valuable idea to keep at the back of your mind. Why would a person from a country that was colonized want to leave that country and come to the country that now belongs to the colonizers? And the reason for that is the colonizers have made those countries so bad that the people there had to leave their own country and come to the homeland of the countries that were colonizing them, because that's where the riches have gone to. That's where all the resources are now at. And I think it's important to say there is how you look at people differently when you understand that, oh, okay, it's not that they necessarily wanted to come here, it's that they had to come here. People need to go to where there's resources. That's why people want to go to Germany, want to go to London, England. That's why they want to go to America. That's why they want to come to Canada. And that's not to say that there aren't other great things. The forefathers, although they wrote in they made some mistakes, some horrible mistakes. If you look back at Lincoln's praise for his influence on ending slavery. But there's other information that you need to take into account there, such as why did Lincoln end slavery? It wasn't that he was necessarily sympathetic to blacks. He also had slaves. The reason Lincoln ended slavery was for political reasons. The political reasons were he needed something to galvanize, and that's what he needed. That's what it took, was to end slavery. So it's not that Lincoln did not want slavery and by any means was going to end it. Lincoln was a man that needed something and wanted power. And to gain power, there's sacrifices that need to be made. And that was a position he was forced to take in order to galvanize his troops. All these things in history have effect on our society today. Terms like sail up the river, terms like call spade a spade, terms like open the kimono, they're all based in, or Indian giver, they're all based in racist ideologies, they're all based in biases, racism and unfair treatment, and the lack of equality is actually built into our language. And if you start to look at things that way, it affects how we design, it affects how we think. Changing how you think and how you speak remaps your brain in some ways. So I think it's important to ask questions about certain terms. I think it's important to make sure that you have a diverse culture if you're an employer, to have a diverse culture of employees. There's people who would argue against having diversity as a lead requirement for a job position, and there are points to those arguments, but having it as one of the requirements, I think, is of value. What it is saying is there needs to be some sort of opportunity and equity given to allow minority groups opportunities within society. There's difficult hurdles that are often experienced by minority groups, such as going in. I have a friend who went in for a job interview, and there are a group of people all applying for the same job. Majority of them are white. One of the white men who were applying for this job leaned over, said, "Everyone here might as well leave. I know the boss." And he ended up getting the position. Now that's a very simple thing, but if you break it down, because of colonialism, because of history and historic events, what's happened there is all the resources were taken from certain countries and moved to other countries. There is a majority rule in places like Canada and America. Therefore, people who have a long history of wealth and a long history of knowing their own history, whereas many Black Americans unfortunately don't know their history because it was taken from them. Even Black Americans that may not have come from Africa and were already here, their families were torn apart, just like what they're doing to the to the migrants from Mexico and other countries. They're taking mothers and children and they're separating them. There's power in separating families because if you want to break your slave, you need to break the lineage. So when you have things like that, when you have people taking families apart, and you have the repercussions of that over decades, what happens is there's a lack of resources in those cultures, in those neighborhoods. And so they likely don't have as many leaders in positions of power to have the opportunities for those jobs and to allow for growth and to allow for what I believe in Canada should aim for, which is a better society where there's equity for as many Canadians as possible. We need to try extreme measures to equal things out, and I don't believe in a lot of those in communism at all. I think that when people are doing something really great, they deserve to be rewarded. I understand that people want to monetize their art, monetize their talents, and if you're an entrepreneur, benefit from your hard work. That's why I think I think it's very important to think about that with design. Design can be more, as Dory Turnstall has said many, many times. Design is not just about selling a product. Design can be used to teach. Design can be used to explore ideas. Design can be used to overturn these old ideas and biased concept and racist ideologies to push and promote a better understanding of our future and understanding of society and culture for a more inclusive and responsible country and society. And that's something that I try to take. I think I try my best to encourage others to do.